Strategists watch today's committee testimony with keen interest in the tactics being deployed by the Liberals and opposition forces. So let's bring them in to size up the fallout. Caitlin Keeley is with Media Style. She leans a little to the left. Jason Leader is with Insight Canada. He leans a little to the right. And Seamus Murphy is with Council Public Affairs. He's leaning into the controversial middle for the Liberals. Let's just quickly bring in some. I want to get your thoughts on this, Jason. Jody Wilson-Raybould just put out a statement moments ago. She said, "Of course, I'll make myself available to the committee if requested to give additional testimony, to answer any further questions and provide further clarity that may be required." I see a big smile coming on Andrew Scheer's face for that one. How can you get her to be so helpful for you guys?
She's just so helpful. She's just so helpful. What a public servant, Don. I just can't believe it. She's, it's the same as, remember when Mr. Trudeau sort of famously said her presence in cabinet speaks for itself. Well, I think her reaction speaks to itself to whatever she heard from Mr. Wernick and from Mr. Butts today. She's obviously not too happy about what she heard and wants to sell her side of the story. The Liberals are going to stonewall. They already stonewalled today. There was a motion put to the committee to have her back to answer some of this testimony. There's going to be incredible pressure for them to have her back. I don't know what they're going to do with that suggestion.
Seamus, you got to think the Liberals have to let her come back before the committee, don't you?
Well, what I can say is the letter she should have written is one communicating that she had made a final decision on this SNC-Lavalin issue, which she never did.
Oh, that's a segue. Just deal with the question first.
But what I will say is let the Justice Committee decide whether or not they want to bring her back.
Don't you think this is pressuring them from inside the Liberal Party?
And what I will say is that this government, albeit belatedly, has decided that transparency is the way to go forward. Can you think of any other government that would, allow themselves to be subject to, such public scrutiny? It hasn't happened in the past. They've taken a terrible beating because they've decided to let Canadians view the facts, see both sides, and make the decision for themselves on which side they believe. So these conversations were happening behind closed doors before the holidays. Now they're happening out in the public. So if Jody Wilson-Raybould wants to come back to committee, fine, let's hear it. Then are you going to have Gerald Butts come back again to then respond to what she has to say? I mean, I'm sure at some point in time this debate needs to end and we need to move on with the other issues that the country has to deal with. But sure. Let's hear it.
I'm going to call you Seamus Segway from now on. That's how we're going to introduce you. I got to ask you, Caitlin, though, seriously, you've given the clerk a chance to come back and relaunch rockets at the committee. You've got the deputy minister coming back to clarify. How can you not get the star witness to come back?
Oh, I totally agree. And I would like to say that watching Michael Wernick today was like watching someone light themselves on fire. I'm not quite sure what he was thinking, but he was so combative and so aggressive. Maybe he thinks that he's on his way out and this was his last stand, but it was quite the thing to watch.
I'll stick with you on this one, Gabe. What struck you as the most interesting, either with Jerry Butts or with Wernick? Was there anything that jumped out and you said, aha, that gives the story a lot more oxygen?
I think the strategic error they made in the cabinet shuffle that they have obviously learned to regret, where they tried to convince Minister Wilson-Raybould to go into Indigenous services. As a First Nation woman, there is no way she would ever be able to do that position. I don't understand how an organization like the Liberal government, who has spent so much time on reconciliation, could have made that misstep and made that mistake, because they should know that that's not something she's going to do and that she couldn't do. It wouldn't be fair.
Especially when she'd campaigned against the Indian Act, and the Indian Act is the guiding legislation to deal with the Indigenous services. Do you think they really dropped the ball on that one, Seamus?
Look, I think if there was a moment of contrition today from Gerald Butts, it was the recognition that that they should have anticipated that. I mean, what we learned today was that the rationale for the cabinet shuffle had nothing to do with SNC-Lavalin. They made the miscalculation that it would make sense to put Jody Wilson-Raybould into Indigenous services, and that is what led to the broken trust, which we've seen on display here. So I think there's a recognition from the government that, or from Gerald Butts today, that was an error. But we heard his account that being Minister of Justice was Jody Wilson-Raybould's dream job. And, when it became obvious that, they had offered her a change, she had turned it down, then they had a real question. What do we do with her? And that's what has led to this entire mess.
You see, Jason, I don't know how you read it. I really didn't hear Butts give a really compelling reason why Wilson Raybould had to be yanked out and put in Indigenous services, because the only reason they gave, really, was that Treasury Board needed Jane Philpott, and therefore they just moved her in there. He never really gave a compelling reason why he did that. And then not a really compelling reason for why she couldn't be moved back when she said no. Did you hear one?
Of course not. This was actually the weakest point in Mr. Butt's testimony, and I think you know, if we're sort of pulling ourselves back and doing some analysis, I think, you know, even though that we're talking about this means they're losing the war. Jerry fought a bunch of battles today and fought some of them to a draw. This was the weakest point in his testimony. And the reason why it's so weak is, remember why he said that they wanted to put Jody Wilson-Raybould in that. It's the most important job. It's one of our most important jobs. Jody, you said no. We were shocked at that. You know who we're going to put in there? Seamus O'Regan, probably our worst performing minister. I mean, it's a laughable narrative that that Mr. O'Regan, who's gone from misstep to misstep to misstep, is actually put in this job that Jody Wilson-Raybould, they were holding it open for her, and every team member has to step in. I think that was the weakest point of his testimony. And I will say as well, and I'm gonna echo the rest of the panelists, or some of them. Mr. Wernick's testimony today, he is not helping the Prime Minister in any way, shape, or form. He's not helping the public service in any way, shape, or form. I have so much respect for the public service, and this guy is coming off as combative and partisan and a jerk, and it's very easy to understand how Ms. Wilson-Raybould felt like she was being pressured when you see that guy come in there and slam those sort of social media tweets on the table and say, I'm being pressured. Really? Seriously? I think it's easy for anybody to understand that guy phoning me at night. It's possible to understand how I might have felt pressured.
Now, Seamus, I do got to give you a chance on this, because Seamus is not the most trouble-free minister. He has had his share of stepping in cow patties. So if this Indigenous services is so pivotal to the government agenda that they're going to take the Attorney General and Justice Minister and put her in there, why would you put Seamus in the holster?
I have to back up my fellow Shamai here. So, look, Jason, I think we watched the same testimony. Gerald Butts did give a reason around their rationale. Jane Philpott had been vice chair of the Treasury Board. Made sense to make her the new president of the Treasury Board, replace Scott Bryson. They were concerned about the message that this would send to the Indigenous community on a major priority for the government. They thought, what is a better decision than take our strongest advocate for Indigenous issues in cabinet and put her in that role? That was Jody Wilson-Raybould. Now, that has blown up in their face, obviously. But when she said no, they had a question around, what do we do here? It's clear that Seamus O'Regan had some challenges in terms of his relationships with stakeholders at Veterans Affairs. So once they had, this decision that they were grappling with, they said, look, let's just fix this. Let's move Seamus there. For now, we've got 8 months till the election.
And how much trouble can he get
in? It's so important. Let's just roll the dice. Let him do it. He screwed everything else up. Why not this?
Hindsight is 20/20. But that was you're dealt with the cards that you have at the time, and there's only so many seats at the cabinet table, and this is what happened.
All right, Kate.